The courtroom in the small Midwestern town felt colder than usual that morning, even though it was late spring. Sunlight filtered weakly through tall, narrow windows, casting pale rectangles on the polished wooden floor. The air carried a faint smell of old paper, floor cleaner, and something else: nervousness. People had been filing in since early morning, whispering to one another, taking seats as if they already knew how the day would end. At the front of the room, the judge sat with a face carved from years of experience. This was not his first difficult case, nor would it be his last. He adjusted his glasses and reviewed the thick file in front of him, page after page filled with statements, timelines, and unanswered questions. To him, this was a case of facts and procedure. Emotion had no official place here. To the left sat the attorneys, one side confident, almost relaxed, the other tense, flipping through notes, aware that public opinion had already made up its mind. The gallery behind them was filled with townspeople, neighbors, reporters, and a few quiet strangers drawn by rumors and headlines. Most had come expecting closure. Few expected truth to shift. Near the prosecution's table sat a police K-9 unit. The dog, a large German shepherd with a black and tan coat, sat perfectly still beside his handler. His posture was straight, disciplined, and alert, yet calm. His breathing was slow. His eyes scanned the room, not nervously, not aggressively, but attentively. This was a dog trained to notice what humans missed. His handler rested one hand lightly on the dog's leash, more out of habit than necessity. The dog had been through dozens of courtrooms before. He understood the routine: sit, stay, ignore distractions. To everyone else, he was just part of the process, another uniform, another tool of law enforcement. No one paid attention to the back row. That's where the little girl sat. She was small even for her age, legs dangling off the bench, feet not touching the floor. She clutched a worn stuffed bear whose fur had been rubbed thin from constant handling. The bear's eye was missing, replaced with a crude stitch. Her guardian sat close, angled protectively toward her, one arm resting behind her shoulders. The girl's hair was tied loosely, strands falling into her eyes. She didn't fidget like most children. She didn't look around in curiosity. She stared straight ahead. This was her first time in a courtroom. It was also the first time she had been in a public place since the incident months ago. Therapists had advised against it. Doctors had warned it might be overwhelming. But the law required her presence, even if no one expected her to contribute anything meaningful. After all, she was only 3. The bailiff called the room to order. Chairs scraped softly as people adjusted themselves. The judge nodded and proceedings began. Voices filled the space, measured, formal, detached. Legal language washed over the room like background noise. Dates were mentioned, locations referenced, events described in careful, sanitized terms. But the girl didn't seem to hear any of it. Her attention drifted, not to the lawyers, not to the judge, but slowly, deliberately, toward the front of the room. Toward the dog. At first, her eyes merely rested on him. Then her body reacted. Her small fingers tightened around the bear's arm. Her shoulders stiffened. Her breathing, once steady, became shallow. Her feet pulled back, heels pressing against the bench as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Her guardian noticed immediately. "It's okay," she whispered softly, leaning in. "You're safe, everything's okay." The girl didn't respond. Her eyes never left the dog. The German shepherd had noticed her too. At first, it was nothing obvious, just a subtle shift. His ears adjusted slightly, angling backward and then forward again. His eyes lingered longer on the back row than they had on anyone else. His tail, which had been resting calmly on the floor, went still. The handler felt it before he saw it. Years of working together had taught him the difference between routine alertness and something deeper. This wasn't training. This wasn't curiosity. The dog wasn't reacting to a sound or movement. He was recognizing something. The handler glanced down briefly, then followed the dog's gaze to the back of the room. He saw the child sitting there, clutching her toy, staring unblinking at his partner. For a moment, he felt a strange tightening in his chest, an instinctive reaction he couldn't explain. The handler gently adjusted his grip on the leash, not pulling, not correcting, just grounding himself. The dog didn't move. Testimony continued. A witness described a chaotic night. A neighbor recalled flashing lights and raised voices. An officer spoke about responding to a call, about arriving too late to prevent damage. The words were factual, restrained. No one mentioned fear. No one mentioned a child. The girl's breathing grew faster. Her guardian brushed a hand through the girl's hair, trying to soothe her. "Look at me," she murmured. The girl didn't. Instead, something inside her shifted. She leaned forward slightly as if pulled by an invisible thread. Her eyes widened, not with panic but with recognition. Her lips parted though no sound came out. The dog's ears lifted higher now. His muscles tensed beneath his coat, ready but restrained. The handler swallowed. This was wrong. Police dogs were trained to remain neutral in court. They didn't react emotionally. They didn't lock onto individuals unless directed. Yet here he was, watching his partner behave in a way he had never seen inside a courtroom. The judge paused briefly, glancing toward the gallery as he sensed movement. His eyes passed over the back row without stopping. To him, it was just a child shifting in her seat. He returned his attention to the case. No one stopped the moment that was building. The girl slowly pushed herself up, standing unsteadily on the bench. The guardian gasped softly, reaching to steady her, but the child gently pulled away. Her small arm lifted, finger extending, not randomly, not playfully, but with purpose. She pointed directly at the police dog. A few heads turned. Someone near the aisle smiled faintly, assuming the child was fascinated by the animal. A reporter lowered his pen, mildly distracted. The bailiff took a step forward, ready to intervene if needed. Then the dog reacted. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He lowered his head slightly, eyes locked on the child, ears fully forward. His breathing changed, slow, controlled, but heavier. The handler felt the leash tighten not from pulling, but from tension. Recognition. The handler's heart began to pound. This dog had worked dozens of search operations. He had found missing people, tracked suspects, stood guard in chaos and noise. He trusted the dog's instincts with his life. And right now, the dog was telling him something mattered. Before anyone could speak, before the judge could call for order, the child's mouth moved. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she spoke. The sound of the child's voice didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed in the courtroom like something fragile being dropped on stone, small, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. He saved. 2 words, barely louder than a whisper. For a heartbeat, no one reacted. It was as if the room needed time to understand what had just happened. The judge's pen stopped moving. A lawyer halfway through a note froze, his fingers still curled around the page. Somewhere in the gallery, a phone slipped from someone's hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. No one bent to pick it up. The girl remained standing on the bench, arm still extended, finger pointing directly at the police dog. Her expression wasn't confused. It wasn't playful. It was serious in a way that didn't belong on a child's face. "He saved," she repeated, a little firmer this time. The handler felt the words hit him in the chest. He looked down at his dog instinctively, searching for reassurance, for some sign that this was coincidence. But the dog didn't look back at him. His eyes were still fixed on the child, unblinking, focused with the same intensity he showed when he locked onto a scent trail. This wasn't random. The judge cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the silence. "Who said that?" he asked, scanning the room. The guardian raised her hand slowly, her face pale. "It was her," she said quietly. "My niece." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Young lady," he said gently, softening his voice, "can you tell us what you mean?" The girl didn't answer him. Her gaze never left the dog. The bailiff stepped forward, unsure whether to intervene or wait. The handler felt every muscle in his body tense. Years of training told him to remain neutral, remain professional, but something about this moment stripped that training bare. The dog shifted just slightly, lowering himself into a sit so slow and deliberate it looked intentional. His tail remained still. His ears stayed forward. The handler knew that posture. It was the posture the dog took when he recognized someone vulnerable, someone he had once been trained to protect. A memory stirred at the back of the handler's mind, not a clear one, just a flicker, a cold night, rain, mud under boots, a frantic radio call about a missing child that never seemed to go anywhere. He pushed it away. The guardian crouched beside the girl. "Sweetheart," she whispered, keeping her voice calm, "what did you mean when you said that?" The girl finally looked down, just for a second. Her small brow furrowed as if she were searching for something buried deep inside her. Her fingers tightened again around the stuffed bear. Then she looked back at the dog. "Dark," she said softly, "I cried." A ripple ran through the courtroom. The judge raised his hand, signaling for calm. "We're going to take a short recess," he announced. 10 minutes. No one argued. As people stood and began whispering urgently, the handler stayed where he was. He didn't trust himself to move yet. His heart was pounding too hard. The guardian lifted the girl down from the bench and held her close. The child didn't resist. Her eyes remained on the dog even as she was carried toward the side of the room. As she passed, the dog's head turned slightly, tracking her movement. The handler finally looked at him. "What is it?" he murmured under his breath, more to himself than the dog. The dog didn't answer, of course. But he didn't relax either. In the hallway outside the courtroom, the guardian sat on a bench, rocking the girl gently. A court officer offered water. A social worker arrived, concern etched across her face. "She hasn't talked like that in months," the guardian said, her voice shaking. "She barely says single words at home." "What happened to her?" the social worker asked softly. The guardian hesitated. "That night, there was an incident at her house. Her parents were arguing, it got violent, she ran, we thought she disappeared." "But she was found," the social worker said. "Yes, hours later, cold, alone. She never explained where she was, she couldn't." Back inside the courtroom, the handler sat with his dog, alone now. He rested both hands on his knees, staring at the floor as memories began to surface uninvited. Rain pouring down in sheets. Flashlights cutting through darkness. The dog pulling hard on the leash, refusing to move on. A collapsed shed behind an abandoned property. The sound of a whimper. His chest tightened. "No," he whispered, "that can't be." At the time, they had been told the child had already been found by family members. The call-off came suddenly. They had logged the search as incomplete but resolved. No one questioned it. No one had time. But his dog had barked, not aggressively, urgently. He had wanted to stay. The handler had argued with his supervisor for 5 minutes before being ordered back to the vehicle. He remembered the frustration, the feeling that something was wrong. The courtroom doors opened again as people returned to their seats. The judge took his place, eyes sharp now, alert in a way they hadn't been earlier. The guardian returned with the child, settling into the same spot near the back. The girl looked calmer now, her head resting against her aunt's shoulder. The judge addressed the room. "Given what has occurred, the court will allow limited clarification," he said carefully. "This is not testimony. This is observation." He looked at the handler. "Officer, has your K-9 ever been deployed in a missing child search within the past year?" The handler swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." "Was a 3-year-old child involved?" The handler's voice was steady, but only because he forced it to be. There was a report. The search was terminated early. The judge nodded slowly. And did your dog indicate a find? The handler hesitated for a fraction of a second. Yes, he said. A murmur swept through the room. The girl stirred at the sound of his voice. Her eyes lifted again, locking onto the dog. He stayed, she whispered suddenly. The guardian froze. The judge raised a hand. What did she say? She said he stayed, the guardian repeated, barely breathing. The handler's throat closed. Because he remembered now. The dog had laid down in front of that shed, refusing to move, refusing to leave, staying. The courtroom was silent again, but this time it felt different, heavier, like the truth was pressing down on everyone at once, demanding space. The judge leaned back in his chair. We are going to review every record from that night, he said firmly. This court will not proceed until we do. The dog finally relaxed, just a little. He lay down at his handler's feet, head resting on his paws, eyes still on the child. As if his job wasn't finished yet, the judge's order hit the courtroom like a gavel strike that never landed. Every record, every report, every call log from that night. Clerks moved quickly, whispering into phones, pulling archived files that hadn't been touched in months. The prosecution shifted uneasily. This was no longer a routine case. Something buried had clawed its way back to the surface. The handler remained seated, his back straight but rigid. His dog lay at his feet, calm now, as if a long-held tension had finally been acknowledged. Not released, just understood. The little girl sat quietly again, her head resting against her guardian's shoulder. She didn't speak, but she didn't withdraw either. Her eyes followed the dog whenever he moved. There was no fear there anymore, only familiarity. A detective was called to the stand, one who had worked the missing child call that night. He adjusted his tie, clearly unsettled by the sudden shift in direction. Detective, the judge said evenly, walk the court through the events of that evening. The detective cleared his throat. We received a 911 call around 11:47 p.m. reporting a domestic disturbance. A child was believed to be present at the residence. When officers arrived, the adults involved were uncooperative. At some point, it was reported that the child had run off. And a K-9 unit was called, the judge asked. Yes, sir. The handler felt every word like pressure against his chest. What happened next? The judge continued. The search began, the detective said, but conditions were poor, heavy rain, limited visibility. About an hour in, another officer received a call stating the child had been located by a family member several blocks away. The search was terminated. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. Was that confirmed? The detective hesitated. It was verbally confirmed. By whom? A supervisor on scene. The handler closed his eyes briefly. That was the part he remembered too well. The judge turned to the handler. Officer, when the search was terminated, what was your K-9 status? The handler straightened. My dog was indicating interest near a structure behind an abandoned property. He refused to disengage. A low murmur moved through the courtroom. Refused, the judge repeated. Yes, Your Honor, he lay down and barked, not aggressive barking, alert barking. And did you investigate the structure? The judge asked. No, sir, the handler said quietly. I requested permission, it was denied. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. The prosecution stood abruptly. Your Honor, with respect, this is speculative. The child was found. There was no report of. The judge raised his hand. Sit down. The prosecutor froze, then slowly obeyed. The judge turned his attention to the back of the courtroom. I want to hear from the child's guardian. The guardian stood on shaky legs, holding the girl securely on her hip. The child didn't protest. She was found later that night, the judge said. Can you tell us where? The guardian swallowed. Behind an old shed, she said, at the edge of a vacant lot about 2 miles from the house. The handler's breath caught. 2 miles? The judge leaned forward. Who found her? A neighbor, the guardian replied. They said they heard crying. The judge nodded slowly. Did law enforcement accompany them? No, she said. By the time officers arrived, she was already in our arms. The judge closed his eyes for a moment. The timeline was collapsing. The child shifted slightly, lifting her head. Her gaze flicked between the adults speaking, confusion creasing her small face. Then she spoke again, soft but audible. Cold, she said, wet. The guardian stiffened. Sweetheart. She was cold, the judge asked gently. The guardian nodded, tears filling her eyes. Her clothes were soaked, she was shaking. The handler looked down at his dog, his vision blurring. That night came back in fragments now, mud clinging to boots, rain running down his collar, the dog's paws sinking into wet ground as he pulled toward that shed. They had been so close. The judge turned to the clerk. Pull the K9 GPS logs. A few minutes later, a screen lit up at the front of the courtroom. A map appeared, coordinates, timestamps, movement paths. The handler felt his pulse in his ears. There, the clerk said, pointing. This is where the K9 unit stopped. A red dot glowed on the screen. It was exactly where the child had been found. The courtroom erupted not loudly but emotionally. Gasps, shaken whispers, heads turning back toward the little girl, then to the dog. The prosecution stood again, this time pale. Your Honor, this information was not part of the original discovery. The judge's voice was sharp. That much is clear. The child shifted again, suddenly restless. Her breathing quickened. The guardian held her tighter. The dog responded immediately. He rose from the floor, stepping forward just one pace before the handler tightened the leash gently. The dog didn't resist. He simply sat again, closer this time. The girl looked at him and reached out instinctively. The handler froze. The judge watched carefully. After a moment, he nodded once. The handler loosened the leash. The dog approached slowly, deliberately, stopping just short of the child. He lowered himself, resting his head near her knee without touching her. The girl's small hand found his fur. She relaxed instantly. He stayed, she said again, more clearly now. He stayed till light. The courtroom was silent, utterly, completely silent. The handler's eyes filled, because now he remembered everything. They had been pulled off the search just before dawn. The dog had looked back the entire time. The judge spoke softly. Did the child receive medical attention for exposure? Yes, the guardian whispered. Mild hypothermia. The judge closed the file in front of him with a decisive motion. This court has been operating under incomplete and possibly inaccurate information. He looked directly at the prosecution. We will suspend proceedings. An internal investigation will be opened immediately. The prosecutor said nothing. The judge's gaze shifted to the dog, and this K9. He paused, then continued. May have done exactly what he was trained to do. The handler exhaled shakily. The girl leaned forward, resting her forehead briefly against the dog's head. No fear, no hesitation. Just trust. Outside the courtroom, rain began to fall again, light this time, tapping gently against the windows. Inside, the truth had finally caught up. And for the first time since that night, the dog lay down fully at ease. Because the child had been found. And the story that tried to forget her hadn't. The courthouse emptied slowly after the judge suspended proceedings. No one rushed out the way they usually did. Conversations were hushed, fragmented, as if people were afraid that speaking too loudly might disturb something fragile that had finally surfaced. The handler walked beside his dog down the corridor, leash loose, steps heavy. The dog moved calmly, tail low, posture relaxed in a way the handler hadn't seen in a long time. It was the posture of a job unfinished, but no longer ignored. At the far end of the hall, the guardian waited with the child, sitting on a bench beneath a flickering fluorescent light. The girl was unusually quiet again, but not withdrawn. She leaned against her aunt, thumb resting near her mouth, eyes following the dog as he approached. The handler slowed. He wasn't sure what he was allowed to do anymore. Not legally, not emotionally. The guardian looked up. "Officer," she said softly. He nodded, "Ma'am." For a moment, neither spoke. "I didn't know," she finally said. "About the dog, about that night." The handler swallowed. "Neither did I, not fully." The girl slid off the bench and stood on her own. She walked, not rushed, not hesitant, toward the dog. The handler instinctively tightened the leash just a fraction, then stopped himself. The dog didn't move forward. He waited. The girl reached out and pressed her small hand against his chest, right where his heartbeat was strongest. Her breathing slowed again, sinking unconsciously with the steady rhythm beneath her palm. "Warm," she whispered. The handler turned away, jaw clenched. A detective stepped into the hallway holding a thick folder. "Officer," he said, voice low, "the judge wants a full debrief, tonight." The handler nodded once, understood. The detective hesitated, glancing at the child. "We should have looked again," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Yes," the handler said quietly, "we should have." Hours later, the conference room inside the precinct was lit harshly, every flaw exposed under white lights. The mood was nothing like the courtroom. This was where things came apart. Screens showed maps, call logs, body cam footage. Officers sat rigidly, some defensive, some visibly shaken. Supervisors avoided eye contact. The handler sat near the back with his dog at his feet. The dog rested his head on his paws, eyes half-lidded, calm amid the tension. The lead investigator spoke. "We're reconstructing the timeline minute by minute," she said. "No assumptions, no shortcuts." The footage rolled. Body cam audio crackled with rain and raised voices. A chaotic scene at the house. Adults shouting. A child crying in the background, faint, almost missed. The handler's hands curled into fists. "That's her," he said hoarsely. The video paused. The investigator nodded. "That cry occurs at 11:52 p.m., 5 minutes after the initial call." The footage continued. Officers searching the yard, flashlights cutting through rain, radio chatter overlapping. Then the K9 footage. The handler watched himself on screen, younger somehow, more confident. He saw the dog pulling forward, nose low, muscles taut. "Indication," the handler said softly, narrating his own memory. "He picked up her scent trail there." The map overlay appeared again, the red dot inching closer to the abandoned lot. Then the radio call. "Stand down, child located." The handler closed his eyes. The investigator paused the footage again. "This call," she said, "was never confirmed visually. No officer verified the child's location before termination." Silence filled the room. A supervisor shifted uncomfortably. "We were under pressure," he said. "Resources were stretched, weather conditions." "That child was 3, the investigator cut in. No one argued. The footage resumed. The handler saw himself hesitating, arguing briefly with someone off camera. Then the leash tightening, the dog looking back. The room was quiet except for the sound of rain in the recording. At 4:31 a.m. the footage ended. The investigator turned off the screen. At approximately 5:10 a.m., the child was found by a civilian 2 miles from the residence, at the same location the K9 had indicated hours earlier. She let that sink in. "The dog was right," someone said quietly. The handler didn't look up. He always is. Across town, in a quiet hospital room, the girl slept curled beneath a blanket, stuffed bear tucked under her chin. A pediatric nurse checked her vitals gently, then stepped back. The guardian sat beside the bed, exhaustion etched into her face. A social worker joined her. "She's been more verbal today," the social worker said softly. "That's significant." The guardian nodded. "She always talked to him," she whispered. "To the dog?" the social worker asked. "Yes, that night." She said his eyes were the only thing she could see in the dark. Back at the precinct, the investigator closed her folder. "This isn't just about a missed search," she said. "It's about a system that decided to stop listening." Her gaze landed on the handler, including to a dog trained to speak without words. The handler finally spoke. "He didn't leave her," he said, "even when I did." No one corrected him. The investigation stretched into the night. Decisions were questioned, protocols rewritten in real time. Accountability hovered like a storm cloud, unavoidable now. Near midnight, the handler stepped outside, breathing in cool air. His dog followed, sitting beside him on the concrete. "I should have fought harder," the handler said quietly. The dog leaned slightly against his leg. "I know," the handler whispered. The next morning, the judge issued a formal order reopening the case tied to the original incident. Charges were reconsidered, evidence reevaluated. The child's presence at the scene, her experience, was no longer an afterthought. And neither was the dog. At the hospital, the girl woke slowly. She looked around, disoriented for a moment, then calm. "Dog?" she asked. The guardian smiled through tears. "He's nearby." The girl closed her eyes again, reassured. Because for the first time since that night, the world was finally making sense. Not because adults had figured everything out, but because they had finally listened to the one voice that never stopped trying to tell the truth. The headlines didn't break all at once. They crept out quietly at first, buried beneath routine news, but inside law enforcement circles, the story spread fast. A suspended case, a reopened investigation, a police K-9 whose instincts had been ignored, a 3-year-old child who had survived a night no one wanted to fully examine. Inside the precinct, the mood had changed. Officers spoke in lower voices. Doors closed more often. Reports were reread with a different kind of attention, less confidence, more caution. What had once been procedure now felt uncomfortably close to failure. The handler returned to work 2 days later. His uniform felt heavier than usual, the badge colder against his chest. His dog walked beside him, steady as ever, unaware of the weight now attached to his actions. In the briefing room, a captain addressed the unit. "This department is under review," he said bluntly. "Every decision from that night is being evaluated. Cooperate fully. No defensiveness. No assumptions." Eyes flicked toward the handler. No one spoke. After the briefing, a younger officer approached him hesitantly. "Sir, I heard your dog stayed on the trail." The handler nodded. "He did." The officer swallowed. That's what they're trained for." "Yes," the handler replied, "and it's what we're trained to listen to." Across town, the child sat at a small table in a therapy room, crayons scattered in front of her. A therapist watched quietly as the girl drew, not aimlessly, but deliberately. She drew a dark shape, then rain, then a small figure beneath a slanted roof. And beside it, larger, solid, unmoving, a dog. The therapist didn't interrupt. When the girl finished, she tapped the page. "He stayed," she said. The therapist nodded. "Yes, he did." That afternoon, the handler was asked to come to the hospital. He stood awkwardly in the hallway, hat tucked under his arm, unsure whether his presence would help or hurt. His dog sat calmly at his side, leash loose. The guardian stepped out of the room and saw them. Her eyes filled instantly. "You came," she said. "I was invited," The handler replied gently. She stepped aside. She's been asking. Inside, the girl sat up in bed when she saw the dog. Her face lit, not with excitement but relief. She reached out both hands. The handler hesitated only a moment before kneeling and guiding the dog forward. The dog approached slowly, respectfully, stopping just within reach. The girl wrapped her arms around his neck and held on. No one spoke. The handler looked away, blinking hard. He didn't leave, the girl murmured into the dog's fur. I called, he stayed. The guardian covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. Later, as the dog lay beside the bed and the girl slept peacefully, the guardian spoke quietly to the handler. She remembered his breathing, she said. She said it was the only thing that didn't change. The handler nodded, throat tight. Dogs don't forget, he said, and they do abandon. Neither did the investigation. Within days, internal affairs interviews began. Supervisors were questioned. Dispatch logs dissected. The decision to terminate the search, once considered routine, was now under a microscope. One supervisor resigned quietly. Another was placed on administrative leave. Policies were rewritten. Mandatory visual confirmation protocols reinstated. K-9 handlers were given expanded authority to challenge termination orders during active scent tracking. None of it felt like enough. The handler was called in to testify, not in court but before an oversight panel. He spoke plainly. He didn't defend himself. I followed orders, he said, but I knew better. The panel chair leaned forward. Would you do it differently now? Yes, he answered without hesitation, even if it cost me my job. The room was silent. Meanwhile, the original criminal case unraveled rapidly. Evidence once considered solid was now compromised. Timelines no longer aligned. Witness credibility faltered. The truth had changed shape. And at the center of it all was a child no one had listened to, and a dog who never stopped speaking. One evening, weeks later, the handler took his dog out for training near the edge of town. The same vacant lot, the same weathered shed, now cordoned off and documented. The dog slowed as they approached, nostrils flaring. He stopped at the exact spot he had indicated months earlier. The handler removed the leash. The dog didn't move. He remembers, the handler whispered. Yes, he did. Back at the hospital, the girl was preparing to go home. She packed her bear into a small backpack, along with a new drawing she insisted on keeping safe. Before leaving, she asked one last question. Will he still work? She asked. The guardian smiled gently. Yes. Good, the girl said. He's good at staying. The handler received a letter the following week. It wasn't disciplinary. It was commendation. Not for following orders, but for telling the truth when it mattered. The dog received recognition too. Not a medal he could understand, but a moment, captured in a photo, that showed him sitting beside the child, calm and watchful. That image spread quietly online. No headlines, no outrage. Just recognition. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from loud voices or powerful arguments. Sometimes it comes from patience, from instinct, from staying when everyone else walks away. Healing did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, small moments stitched together by patience. The girl returned home to a place that felt unfamiliar now. The house was quieter. The walls seemed too still. Nights were the hardest. She slept with the light on, the stuffed bear tucked tight against her chest, her breathing shallow until exhaustion finally pulled her under. But something was different. She spoke more. Not in long sentences, not in explanations, but in truths. Rain loud, she said one night. Cold floor. Dog warm. Her guardian listened without interrupting, learning not to rush the words when they came. Therapists called it progress. The guardian called it courage. Twice a week the girl visited the therapy center. The sessions were gentle, play-based, slow. No pressure to remember, no demand to explain. But every time a picture book showed an animal, the girl pointed. Like him, she'd say. One afternoon, the therapist placed a small toy dog on the table. The girl stared at it for a long moment. Then she pushed it under the table and crouched beside it, wrapping her arms around it tightly. "Stay," she whispered. Across town, the handler struggled in a different way. The investigation had moved on. The department had adjusted. Public attention faded. But the handler felt stuck between two versions of himself, the officer who followed orders and the man who knew better. He replayed that night constantly. What if he had refused? What if he had taken off the leash? What if he had trusted the dog completely? The dog seemed unaffected. He trained, he worked, he slept peacefully. Dogs lived in the present, humans didn't. One evening, after a long day, the handler sat on his porch while the dog lay beside him. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard. "I failed you," the handler said quietly. The dog lifted his head, ears twitching. "I failed her," the handler added. The dog stood, walked over, and rested his head on the handler's knee. It wasn't forgiveness. It was grounding. Weeks later, the therapy center requested something unusual. They asked if the handler and his dog would visit. Not as part of an investigation. Not for publicity. Just for her. The handler hesitated before agreeing. He didn't want to confuse the child, didn't want to reopen wounds. But the therapist explained she associates safety with him. That matters. The visit was arranged carefully. No uniforms, no badges, just the dog and the man he trusted. When they arrived, the girl was sitting on a mat, stacking blocks. She looked up and froze. The dog sat immediately, lowering himself to appear smaller. The girl's eyes widened. Her blocks fell over. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She stood and walked toward him, slow and steady, like someone approaching something sacred. "He came," she said. The handler knelt. "Yes," he replied softly, "he did." The dog didn't move until she touched him. Then he leaned in. The therapist watched from across the room, saying nothing. The girl pressed her forehead against the dog's neck and breathed deeply, once, twice. "I wasn't lost," she said suddenly. The room stilled. The handler looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" the therapist asked gently. The girl frowned, searching for words. "I waited," she said. "He found me." Something inside the handler cracked. That sentence, simple, unfiltered, reframed everything. She hadn't been wandering. She hadn't been helpless. She had survived. After that day, the girl slept better. She still had bad dreams, but they didn't swallow her whole. When she woke crying, she asked for the same thing every time. Dog breathing. Her guardian recorded the dog's steady breathing during one visit and played it softly at night. It worked. The handler continued visiting, always quietly, always on the child's terms. Sometimes she talked. Sometimes she just sat beside the dog, hand resting on his back. Once she asked the handler a question. "Why you take him away?" she asked, not accusing, just curious. The handler swallowed hard. "Because I was told to." She nodded, considering. "But he stayed," she said. "Yes," the handler replied, "he did." That answer seemed to satisfy her. The reopened criminal case finally concluded. Charges were amended. Accountability found its way where it belonged, not loudly, not perfectly, but honestly. The judge issued a statement emphasizing procedural failure and the importance of listening to people and to instincts. The handler read it alone, late one night. It didn't erase the past, but it acknowledged it. One afternoon, months later, the girl and her guardian attended a small community event at the park. Families gathered, children ran, dogs lounged in the grass. The handler and his dog were there too, off duty, just another pair enjoying the sun. The girl spotted them from across the field. She didn't hesitate. She ran. The handler stood instinctively, heart racing, but the dog stayed calm as the girl reached him and hugged his side. "Found you," she said happily. The handler laughed softly, tears in his eyes. "No," he said, "you found us." As the girl ran back to her guardian, the handler realized something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. This wasn't just about a mistake. It was about a bond formed in the dark, a promise kept without words, and a kind of healing that didn't need to be explained, only honored. The courtroom felt different the second time. It wasn't colder or warmer. The benches hadn't changed. The seal on the wall still hung slightly crooked, but the air no longer carried certainty. It carried attention. Every person in the room knew now that assumptions had failed them once. They weren't eager anymore. They were careful. The handler entered quietly, his dog at his side. No cameras followed them. No whispers rose. People simply watched, aware now that this dog was not decoration, not procedure, not background. He was memory. The guardian arrived moments later with the girl. She wore a pale blue dress and small shoes that squeaked faintly against the floor. She clutched her stuffed bear, but loosely this time, not desperately. When she saw the dog, she smiled. The judge took the bench and surveyed the room. His expression was grave but not distant. This wasn't routine justice. This was repair. "We are here today," the judge began, "to conclude matters that should have been addressed long ago." He looked directly at the girl. "This court acknowledges that some truths do not arrive through testimony," he said. "They arrive through presence." The room was still. The handler felt his chest tighten. A final review of evidence was presented, briefly, efficiently. There was no argument left to make. The facts had settled. Accountability had landed where it needed to. The judge issued his ruling. Clear, measured, final. As he spoke, the girl swung her legs gently beneath the bench, listening without understanding the words, but understanding the tone. When the judge finished, he paused. Then, unexpectedly, he addressed the handler. "Officer," he said, "your K-9's conduct has been noted in the record." The handler stood. "Not as evidence," the judge continued, "but as integrity." A murmur rippled through the room. The judge's gaze shifted to the girl. "Young lady," he said gently, "you don't need to say anything today." The girl nodded. Then, without prompting, she stood. The guardian reached for her instinctively, but the girl stepped forward on her own. Not far, just enough to be seen. She looked at the dog, then at the judge, then back at the dog. "He stayed," she said clearly. 2 words. But this time, they didn't freeze the room. They grounded it. No gasp followed. No panic, just a deep shared understanding. The judge nodded once. "Yes," he said softly, "he did." The handler felt tears spill freely now. He didn't wipe them away. The dog shifted closer to the girl, sitting tall, steady. No command given. None needed. The judge struck the gavel, not sharply, not loudly, but firmly. "This court is adjourned." People stood slowly. No rush, no chatter. Some wiped their eyes. Others simply watched as the handler knelt and clipped the leash more securely, his hand lingering in the dog's fur. The girl returned to her guardian's side, satisfied. Outside, the courthouse steps were bathed in afternoon light. The sky was clear. The rain from months ago felt like another lifetime. The handler paused at the bottom of the steps. The girl stood a few feet away, holding her bear. She looked up at him. "You listen now?" she asked. He knelt so they were eye level. "Yes," he said, "I do." She considered that, then nodded. "Good," she said, "he always talked." The handler laughed through tears. He did. They parted without ceremony. No hugs, no promises. Just understanding. Later that evening, the handler took his dog to the training field one last time that week. The dog ran freely, joyful, alive in the open space. The handler watched him and felt something lift. Not guilt. Responsibility released. That night the girl slept through without waking. No nightmares, no crying, just slow, even breaths. In her dreams there was rain, but it wasn't loud anymore. And there were eyes in the dark. Watching. Staying. Time moved forward the way it always does, quietly, without asking permission. The courthouse returned to routine. New cases filled the calendar. Different names were spoken from the bench. The moment that had once stopped the room faded from daily conversation, but it never truly disappeared. It lingered in small changes no one announced out loud. Protocols were followed more carefully. K9 handlers were listened to more closely. When a dog indicated, people paused before overriding instinct with convenience. Nothing dramatic. Just better. The handler noticed it first during a routine search call weeks later. His dog pulled toward a tree line, sensed strong and confident. This time, no one questioned it. No one rushed him. They followed. They found what they were looking for. Afterward, a younger officer clapped the handler on the shoulder. "Good call," he said. The handler smiled faintly. "Not mine." At home, the handler framed one photograph and placed it on a shelf, not prominently, not for display, just somewhere it belonged. It showed his dog sitting calmly on a therapy room mat, a small child beside him, her hand resting on his back as if it had always known where to go. The handler didn't look at it every day, but he knew it was there. The girl grew. Slowly, steadily, in the way children do when they are allowed to feel safe again. She started preschool. She learned letters, colors, songs. Her teachers noticed she was quiet but observant. She didn't speak unless she meant it. When she did, people listened. She loved rainy days. Not because they reminded her of the night, but because they didn't scare her anymore. Sometimes she drew pictures with dark skis and small shelters. Sometimes she drew a dog nearby, not looming, not heroic, just present. Her guardian once asked her, "Why do you always draw him there?" The girl shrugged. "He knows where I am." The handler and the girl didn't see each other often. That wasn't the point. Their lives moved in different directions, connected by something that didn't need constant tending. But once a year, at a small community safety event, they crossed paths. The first time the girl was shy. The second, she waved. The third, she walked straight up to the dog and sat beside him like it was the most natural thing in the world. "He's older," she observed one year, studying the gray beginning to show around his muzzle. "Yes," the handler said, "so am I." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's okay," she said, "he still stays." The handler didn't answer. He didn't need to. Years later, the dog retired. There was no ceremony, no speeches, just a quiet handoff of the leash at the end of a long day. The dog walked into his new life without confusion, tail wagging slightly, content. The handler took him home. They adjusted to slower mornings, longer naps, shorter walks. The dog slept deeply, peacefully, like someone who had finished what they came to do. On the wall near the dog's bed, the handler placed a child's drawing that arrived in the mail one spring. It showed a small shed, a dark sky, and beside it a dog lying down, eyes open. On the back, written carefully in uneven letters, were two words. "He stayed." The handler sat on the floor beside his dog and held the paper for a long time. When the dog passed, years later, it was quiet. There was no storm outside, No sirens, just a calm afternoon and a familiar presence slipping away. The handler stayed with him until the end. Because that's what you do. At the funeral, small, private, the handler stood alone for a moment after everyone else had left. He rested his hand on the marker, feeling the weight of years settle into something gentler. "You did good," he said softly. Across town, the girl, now older, stood by a window as rain fell lightly outside. She watched it without fear. Her guardian asked, "You okay?" The girl nodded. "I was just thinking." "About what?" She considered, then said, "Sometimes the world is loud, but some things talk quiet." The guardian smiled. "Yes," she said, "they do." That night the girl slept soundly. No dreams of darkness. No need for recorded breathing. Just rest. Because safety, once truly learned, doesn't disappear. It stays. And somewhere, between a courtroom that finally listened, a dog that never stopped, and a child who found her voice, something important had changed. Not the world. Just enough of it. Enough to matter.